I would like to introduce Brad Sipes. Brad has been with GuernseyTingle since January of 2002. During that time, he has focused on religious architecture and helping churches turn their visions into finished spaces. Prior to coming to GuernseyTingle, Brad was with a firm that designed and built churches from Indiana all the way to Florida. Brad? You gotta hold, you sit it up here? With the mic, you wanna hold the mic, you sit it up? All right, there you go, thank you.
Good morning. The manual asked me if I would come up and speak with a bunch of churches on master planning. I was like, oh, I'd love to. I said, it'll take me about 2.5 hours. And he said, great, you have 30 minutes. And now he's left me with 25. So we will see how quickly we can do that. So I think everybody's heard this, but a master plan is really just a roadmap. Has everybody have heard that before? And as a roadmap, it doesn't necessarily give you 100% the answer to how you're going to get to your vision. It instead gives you possibilities on how you're going to achieve your vision. And I've done a lot of master plans with churches, and people say, can you go into any church and help them with a master plan? And my short answer is no, I can't. Because in order for anybody, any outside consultant, to come in and help a church with a master plan, the church has to know one thing, and it's the most important thing for any master plan process, and that is, what is your vision? And that's something that no consultant can actually answer, but hopefully every church can answer. And that becomes the driving force behind any master plan project. I also have people often answer, well, when should we start the master plan? And the short answer is, when you're ready. So whether you're planning on building a building in a year, in 5 years, whatever your time frame is, it doesn't really matter. What the important part is that you have a vision, you know that God is speaking to you, and you know direction that you want to head. That's the time to start a master plan process. Because the master plan itself won't set the time frame, it will set the direction. And then, like all churches, and this might come as a surprise to some of you, churches move at their own pace. So unlike commercial projects, which I also get the privilege to work on, they walk in my door and they tell you exactly what their time frame is, and they want it done in 2 weeks if they could have it done. Churches walk in the door, and that time frame can be anywhere from a month to literally 4 years. And I've had church projects take that same amount of time. So churches move at their own pace. And the reason is, I think as all of you can probably attest to, it's a combination of staff and a combination of volunteers and the congregation, which may not even be volunteers. You have to get everybody in that entire church agreeing to that vision and moving forward on that vision. That's not an easy task, and that can take varying amounts of time. So I want to tell you a short little story which I think helps summarize how important a roadmap is. So my wife, she's a planner. When we decided that we were going to go up to Canada in the middle of summer, up on the side of the mountain to a ski resort, just to get away from it all, she was like, great, I'll make a plan. So we got in the car, we started driving. We drive to Pennsylvania, see her family, Ellis Island, teach the boys some history, jump into New York City to watch the Blue Man Group for some entertainment, go to Ben & Jerry's on the way up to stop and get a history on how ice cream is made, maybe eat a pint or two of really good ice cream. And then she's even picked out what place we need to cross the border because that location is known for putting people through quickly and not a whole lot of traffic goes through there. So we went through there. Everything is great. She's planned it all out. I'm driving. She's my co-pilot. Going great. Get across the border, and she's like, I'm tired. Both boys sound asleep in the back of the van. She's like, you need to drive this road for an hour and a half. You're going to come up on this city, and in an hour and a half, wake me up. I'll tell you where to go next. Awesome. She falls asleep. I'm happily driving along, listening to my audiobook in my ears, thinking that everything's great. I start seeing signs for the town coming up in 10 miles or so. I wake her up and say, hey, where do I need to turn next? She goes, oh, she jumps on, grabs her phone. that's the moment that we learned that Verizon America is not the same thing as Verizon Canada. And that phone was like, no service. Do you want to pay for a data plan? Being cheap, I said, no. I won't pay for it. My whole goal was to go up on the side of a mountain, get away from it all. I don't have cell service up there. I'm not interested in it. I said, I got this covered. I'm going to stop over here at the little tiny gas station and just go buy a map. That's when I learned that I was also living in the 1990s. Because when I went to the gas station and asked the guy for a map, he looked at me and said, what's that? I said, a little thing that folds out, shows you where you're going. He's like, don't you have a phone? So I tried 2 more gas stations, struck out on all those. So finally my wife has the idea. She's like, let's go buy an atlas. She's like, they still sell those. I was like, well, that's awesome. I asked the gas attendant, said, hey, where's the nearest bookstore? He looked at me and said, what's that? So not the easiest thing to find a bookstore when you're driving around a town that you don't know with no directions. We finally find a little tiny mom and pop bookstore. We go in there, we ask for an atlas. They kind of stare at us. They said, we might have one. So they go into the back, they come out, put an atlas down. And that's where I learned that there's this thing called French Canadians, because that atlas, which had all the roads on it, wasn't in English. We bought it anyway. So we buy the atlas. It helps for the next several hours, but it's a little difficult because the only one in the car who speaks French at any level was my wife. She took that when she was in high school. She won't let me tell you how many years ago that was, but it wasn't last year that she was in high school. So a little rusty on the French. And we managed to kind of slowly find our way to our destination. But then we start going up the side of the mountain. And as we're going up the side of the mountain, her French breaks down. The roads get really hard to tell where they are. We get lost, completely lost. We finally come back down out of the side of the mountain, or actually on the other side of the mountain, as we found out. And that's about the time that I said, you know what? That's really not that expensive. Maybe I'll pay for that coverage. So I pay for the coverage finally. And then this is the only moment of the week that I was actually very thankful that I had 2 teenage boys, because she pulls it up on her phone. That phone, we get directions on how to get back there. And then my one son speaks up and says, hey, just so you know, when you go back up the side of this mountain, you're not going to have any surface again. You might want to take a bunch of screenshots of the directions before you lose surface again. He had to help us figure out how to take screenshots of the map, which he did. So we ultimately get there and everything works out well. But I've told that story many times, but it really is a perfect analogy for a master plan. And the reason is that I don't care if you've made it 3/4 of the way to your destination and you think that you're about ready to build, right? If you haven't done a master plan, even a simple one, how do you know that you're putting that addition or whatever you're doing in the right location where it's not going to cause you problems later down the road? And master plans come in huge spectrums, right? But the simple answer is that they typically look forward. I got to see which one I'm on, sorry. They typically look forward into the future by a number of years. So this isn't a snapshot of what the church is going to be in 20 years. A good master plan is a snapshot of what the church could potentially be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So it needs to have those incremental steps to actually be a useful tool for you in the future. Does that make sense, everybody? And those years are, again, driven by the church. So that's a typical range, but it can be whatever range the church decides. I have churches that want to move much faster, and so those increments get closer. I have churches that say, no, we want to look what we want to be in like 40 years from the future. Can we do one that steps along at a slower pace? Absolutely. The years are really irrelevant. Again, that's all based on the church's schedule and their time frame. It's looking at it in increments that is the important part. So you figure out what your ultimate vision wants to be, and then you figure out what steps you have to take in order to get there. And again, I started by saying it really is listening to what God is telling you to do, with the most important part is the spiritual part. Listening to what he tells you to do spiritually, Then you can figure out, once you know that, you can figure out how the physical built environment backs up that vision, that spiritual vision, and you can figure out how the cost back that up, and you can figure out how the sequencing of all of those things back that up. That make sense, everyone? And when you look at an overall master plan, it really does break down into two things. It breaks down into looking at the site and looking at the building. Those are the only two things that are really on the drawn master plan, but all of the financial stuff is material that goes with a master plan to paint the whole picture. But let's look at just the two things to start with. First one we want to look at is the site plan. And so site plans are, on one hand, fairly straightforward because they're dealing in much more concrete items, meaning that you look at your site and you're automatically going to start looking at what are my constraints that are put on this site. And so some of this you can research yourself. You might want to hire an outside consultant, be an architect or a civil engineer, to come along and say, hey, you have building setbacks, you have buffers along the perimeter. I even did one church where they had property on both sides of a road. And so they had a major roadway that went between their two pieces of property, which they considered their campus. And so we had to look at all of the future expansions of that road as possibilities that would impact what they could do that. So you look at all of those parts that are going to affect the perimeter of their property, and then you start looking also at the topo. So I know in some parts of Virginia, that's pretty flat, so there's only 3 topo lines that go across the entire site. However, in other parts, there will be areas that are unbuildable just because they're too steep. You'll have areas that are wetlands, right, where the water is keeping you from being able to build on it, and then you have setbacks off that water. So you really look at all of those things to define where are the buildable areas on the piece of property. That's where you start. Again, that's all kind of concrete information, but it's where you start with the site plan and fairly straightforward. The next part of the site, though, is you start looking at, great, now that I know where these buildable sections are, what can I put on? And a site plan is going to look at parking. It's going to look at how do I access the site? Do I have more than one entry point? Where do I have things I need to do, like unfortunately, like stormwater, especially in Virginia? You have stormwater management. That often takes up a pretty good sized footprint on the piece of property. So you start playing around with those things, and again, that starts to reduce your building footprint area. And some of those are flexible, meaning that a parking lot can go wherever we want, right? The stormwater, a little bit less flexible, but there is some flexibility on where it goes. So those all start to inform you very quickly on where you can put any types of addition either attached to the building or freestanding from the building. So that's why you start with the site. Once you kind of get an idea of what the site limitations are, then you move on to the actual building itself. The building being the most flexible, meaning that you start to look at your existing building, if you have one. If you're starting from scratch and you don't have any church building, that's great. Then you have the most flexibility. But if you have an existing building, you look at existing building and you decide what's important about this building. Are we keeping the whole building? Is the whole building able to service us for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Do we need to figure that this building is only going to last for 10 years? And after 10 years, we plan on tearing it down or part of it? So you start making those kind of decisions on your existing piece of property. And you even start making some aesthetic decisions. And so you look at the existing building. We had one where it actually had the steeple on the back of the church. And so everything that they could possibly add was going to come in front of the actual worship space. And so it was very important to them that everything be lower. Like they wanted the steeple to be the single point that people saw from the road. So anything that gets added automatically has to be lower. Those are great things to think about. So that's when you start considering the aesthetics of the building itself. Other churches on a more straightforward approach, the original church, the beautiful front facade, that's what everybody identifies as the church. That facade has to stay there no matter what. We can't put anything in front of it. We can only put things off to the sides or off to the back. or freestanding? And then how do you connect them? So you have those type of such. So it really is the most flexible. But then also, the spaces you put on, you need to look as being flexible. Meaning that, let's see, do I have a image of that? No, sorry. We have built many of what I would call a narthex, some people call a lobby, and that is the worship space. So we build this space that can seat 150 people because that's the size of the congregation that they need. Knowing that their aspiration, their vision that God has given them is that they are going to build a worship space that is going to house 300 or 400 or 500. Well, it's hard to use that space and make that space that you built first be able to accommodate that. So you think about, I'm going to build this space. What is this same space that I just built in phase one become in phase 2, 3, or 4? And often the answer is that space that you're worshiping in becomes the narthex, and you build the big worship space behind it. Or it becomes a fellowship hall. So you need to think about the spaces that you're adding on as flexible spaces, because that flexibility is key. And I'm getting high signs. I have 10 whole minutes, which I told you I could do this for 2 hours. So that's all great, and that works. Those key components for a site and a building. But how do you actually go about creating a master plan? And the important part of a successful master plan is that you have to get buy-in from as many people as you possibly can. So if only the building committee, which range in size, 5, 6, 7, 10 people, they love the master plan. If nobody else loves the master plan, you're going to have an uphill battle. So how do you get that buy-in from more people? And the best way to get that buy-in is have those people participate in the process. And the way that we have found that works the best is that you break it into focus groups. So you create focus groups. Those focus groups can be based on the church, based on what your vision is. Typical ones, you can have a worship committee, you have a fellowship committee. I've had straight up kitchen committees that do nothing but look at the kitchen, children's committees, admin committee, whatever you can break the church up into, you form these focus groups. And we always recommend that you have one person from the building committee in each one of those focus groups. And then those focus groups reach out and get people from the congregation to come to just a handful of meetings. You don't need them to volunteer for a year. You need them to come to a handful of meetings and discuss the kitchen. And that way, they get excited about focusing on that kitchen or focusing on the kids area or whatever that focus group is, they get to contribute. And then you bring all that information back to the building committee. The building committee then starts to play with that and sort that out into different groups, and ultimately decides how to put the overall plan together. And then the other thing that we recommend is that to keep even more people to buy in is to literally have, and people call them everything, but congregational meetings. Some churches like to call them town hall meetings, whatever term works for you. But don't wait until the end of the master plan to present it to the congregation. Present it at steps. So like if you gathered all that information and whoever your architect comes up with that first draft of what the master plan can be, and I will tell you from experience, it will not be the master plan. He will get it wrong, and everybody will want to massage it and make changes. That's great. That's the whole idea. You decide when to present those to the congregation so that they can see the steps that the building committee has gone through to look at all the different options. And you do that, honestly, as many times as you can stomach it. I know they're kind of not easy meetings, but you do that 2, maybe 3 times, and then a final one at the very end to show the congregation where you end up with. You actually will end up with a master plan that a majority of the people in the congregation have contributed to, maybe only in parts, but they've had multiple options to weigh in on the entire plan. Because when you present that to the congregation, we really recommend that you give them the opportunity to give you feedback. Again, that has happened in a lot of different ways. Some people that are much more savvy than me digitally, they collect that information digitally. Some people, more my speed, collect it in written letters that then people turn in. I mean, whatever system works for the church, you collect information back from everybody so that they can give your opinion. And then you still have to have that building committee decide how they want to address that, or if they want to address that. Because some of those comments are going to be awesome. Some of those comments you're going to be like, it's a great idea. We really can't accommodate that. But you've given people the ability to buy into the process. And that's what makes, in the end, a successful master plan. But the key part that I would like to highlight is that once you have this master plan, again, it is not the set answer to how you're going to be successful. It is a snapshot. Just like my son made me take the snapshot of my phone, it is a snapshot in time of what this church body in 2026 was thinking on what they would be doing in 20 years. And if it is a good master plan, it will have lots of options on how to get there. So it says, here's the steps that we envisioned in 2026. However, 10 years from now, that vision might change slightly. And you might have to take slightly different steps, but you will be able to understand what they were looking at. So it's not a, here's the building footprint, this is exactly what you're going to build. It instead is to be a tool. And like any good tool, a master plan should get revisited. That makes sense? So it's not something you do and you put on a shelf and you never come back to. It's something that you do, and then you come back to it again, whatever your increments line up with. So if you do the 5, 10, 15, 20 years, maybe you come back in 3 years and say, let's look at that master plan and figure out if that still applies. And if it doesn't, how would we modify it today? But it gives you a starting point, and it gives you all the information that that group of people 3 years ago, 4 years ago had, and you can quickly get up to speed without starting the whole process over. That makes sense for everybody? And using it as a tool, as opposed to a written down solid answer. Again, I'm sure there's lots of questions, and I think I have 4 whole minutes before Emmanuel's going to kick me off. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask in regards to the master plan? Nope. Okay. All right. Are you going to be mad at me if I finish 4 minutes early for you, Emmanuel? There's a couple slides I don't think I got to all the way, but we talked about how do you use a master plan, and you use it strictly, you use it as a tool, and you look at it as a tool. It is not a set answer. It truly is a roadmap, and it will show you all the different ways you can get to your destination, even if that destination changes slightly. And really, I think this is the part I should have, one of the points I'd like to really highlight is that the best part of master plan is that all churches have limited time and limited money. I mean, that's true for almost any church I've ever dealt with. And the worst thing that you can do is build something and 5 years later be sad that you built that in the wrong spot. That you're like, oh, this is a great office wing, but if we would have only built it over there, then we could expand the church worship space. But right now, we can't expand the church worship space because we built this in the wrong location, and we have to tear something down in order to do what we want to do today. That's really what you're trying to avoid with a master plan, and it is where I suggest every church start. And again, they can have big ranges. Last thing I want to point out is that there is a slight difference between a master plan and a full building assessment. So I also recommend that you get a building assessment to back up the master plan, but a building assessment, and we actually have a couple of engineers in here right now, they'll tell you that a building assessment is where you bring in engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, architects, and they go through your existing facility and assess the viability of what they find. So they look at your mechanical system and they will say that mechanical system over here has 10 years life, this one only has 2 years life. Or they'll say this is already maxed out, you have a great boiler system, but you're never adding anything else onto it, it can't be expanded. So you can do a building assessment of your current facility. You can do that structurally. They can tell you structurally how the building's performing, what its longevity expectations are. You can do that from an electrical standpoint, tell you whether your building is maxed out from an electrical standpoint, and if you do anything, you're gonna have to add a new service to the building. So that is a great study that then backs up the master plan, so that you know this building assessment says, I viably have X amount of square footage that I can probably put onto this building without having to update the electrical system. Great. But once I go into phase 2 of my master plan, I know I'm gonna have to bring in new power, or I know I'm gonna have to update the entire mechanical system. We're working on a church right now, and they know, they've done a building assessment, and they did this one on their own, but they focused it on their mechanical system, and they know that over the course of the next 5 years, they can realistically expect to spend $1 million to $1.2 million in replacing all of their mechanical system, right? Which is a relatively important thing to know when you're talking about how much money you have and what you can spend on the next edition. So those two pieces of thing, slightly different, but they go hand in hand together. Okay? I think I'm on my time frame, Emmanuel. Oh, a couple questions, yes.
Yes, sir, thank you. Multi-purpose building, gymnasium, ball fields. What group of professionals would help us choose the location? In other words, we're in a rural area, might already have property. See the need, but might put something on a piece of property that folks won't come to.
Right.
Who do we talk to make sure it goes in the right place?
So this is a new building going on to a new piece of property or an existing piece of property that you own?
It's it'll be a new building.
Okay.
Have the property, but not sure it's in the right location.
Yeah, so the two people that would be key to that would be an architect and a civil engineer. The electrical engineer and the mechanical engineer are gonna throw things at me to start with, but those are the two people that are going to set the size of the building. The architect's gonna tell you how big it needs to be in order to do exactly what you want. The civil engineer is gonna tell you where it can go on the piece of property, and then the architect will work with the civil engineer to make sure that if you ever want to expand that, how does it expand? So you really need both the architect and the civil engineer working hand in hand to be able to answer that question completely.
Yeah, just one other part of it. I think what I'm looking for is the marketing draw.
Is the what, sorry?
It's the draw. How do we give people, how do we know we're in the right location that the outlying counties will come, or the communities is accessible to the communities?
So you're talking about like, how do you know that where you place it is not for the church, but where it will can best serve the surrounding community? So you really need to do a analysis of where the population is, and you can gather a lot of that information actually from the county itself. So if you have an economic development director in your county, they will be able to tell you where the current population is located. They can tell you, so that's kind of the free part of that you can get. You can actually hire what really some people refer to as a marketing company that can tell you where those needs are. But I would start with the economic development director and tell them what you're wanting to do, and they will at least be able to start you down that path and give you a bunch of good information.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Right. For churches that are still dreaming and maybe not ready to start spending substantial money, can you, I know this is not a fair question, ballpark, what kind of dollars we're talking about for a church, just to do a master plan?
Sure. Yep. So master plan, my rule of thumb is, and it depends a lot on how big the church is, how big the property is, and what your goal is. But you can do them for as cheap as right around $10,000. And we have done some that we've pushed up over $50,000. But the $50,000 ones start to get very detailed. If you're a small church and you're just looking to get an idea, yeah, $10,000 to $15,000 will get you a good concept of a master plan, a good starting point. That answer your question, Pete?
Yes, sir, thank you.
I think so. I think I'm 5 minutes over, so I don't want to. Tom's going to start throwing things next, so cutting into his time.